Guys, we are joined by our lovely guest today, the director and co-writer of Relic, Natalie Erika James. How are you today, Natalie?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Now, tell us a bit about this movie. Me and Jackson just got to watch it this week, and I got to say, we both absolutely loved it. This is my favorite horror film of the year so far by a mile.
Thanks.
Tell me how this came about.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I guess, a relatively long process to get to the point of releasing the film. We started writing it at the end of 2014. And the idea really came from a particular trip that I took to Japan because I was going to see my grandmother and she had Alzheimer's. And on this trip, it was the first time she couldn't remember who I was. So I had a lot of feelings of guilt about, not seeing her more regularly, that kind of thing. And she also lived in this really creepy, traditional Japanese house that I'd always been really scared of as a kid. So I think those two things kind of came together. And that was really the start of the idea. But yeah, my co-writer Christian White and I worked with a production company in Melbourne called Carver Films. And yeah, we probably did about 3 years of development, and then we shot it end of 2018. So it's been a while since then.
I can't believe the emotion that sort of came out of this film. Like, it's the first horror film I've seen in a while where I actually got a little bit emotional, some of those scenes. And maybe it's because I've dealt with a similar thing you have with a grandparent as well. Tell me a little bit about how you sort of connected into the deeper meaning of that sort of side of the story.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think when I was pitching the film, we were trying to get, investors and producing partners on board. You're often asked, like, what are the comparisons or what are some references film-wise? And one of the films that often came up as a reference tonally for me was The Orphanage by Boyona. Great film, and it has a similar kind of emotional gut punch at the end, even though there's definitely a strong kind of horror vehicle driving that story. So yeah, I've always loved that film, and I guess for me it's inherently emotional as well, having that personal connection, but the horror really gives it a framework, and I guess hopefully captures the essence of the experience, and yeah, hopefully captures some emotional truth to that experience and how scary it can be, how scary it is for the relatives of the person suffering dementia, but also for the sufferer, and the fear that's associated with losing yourself and losing your loved ones.
Absolutely. Those are some awesome points that you hit on there, especially about identity. I think that's something universal that not only as we all grow older, but we experience grandparents or even sometimes parents, especially for some older listeners we have out there who have to face some of these challenges. And I think no matter how much these things can be portrayed in the media, or even when it happens to other people, we're still never quite ready to confront when that happens, right?
Yeah, I think so. Totally. I think it's a really scary thing. And I think it's interesting how much having to confront like your parents' mortality makes you think about your own as well. So It kind of works on a number of levels, I think.
So what really inspired you to take out this project, Natalie? Because you've directed a short film in Creswick, and then you kind of returned to something similar and had kind of blown this out to a feature film again here in Relic. So what was some of the inspirations and what drew you so closely?
Well, we actually had a first draft of Relic down when we made Creswick. So Creswick was really a, very consciously made proof of concept short film that really showcased it. We kind of used it as a calling card to show partners and investors, just to say, here's what the film's going to feel like. It's got the same tone, the same themes and setting, but Creswick was just a much more succinct story. So yeah, I mean, I think it was built in from the get-go that we were going to make the feature film. So it wasn't like we made the short and thought, oh, how can we expand this? It was kind of the other way around.
I bet you didn't think that the feature debut for this, particularly after you'd finished in 2018, was going to be in the middle of a pandemic, but it's definitely been an interesting year so far.
Certainly has. I'm so grateful we got to squeeze in our premiere though, because Sundance was in January. So it's kind of like the first stirring of it over in the States. I think people were just starting to wear masks on planes, that kind of thing. But yeah, man, like we definitely had a very different year planned ahead of us, but yeah, it's hard to complain, really.
What was Sundance like? Because I've heard different stories from different people that it's extremely hectic sort of place. Is that right?
Yeah, it was such a whirlwind, I have to
Yeah.
say. Like, usually you go to festivals and you meet a bunch of filmmakers and you get to see lots of films. So it's great to represent your own film, but then just enjoy it. Whereas this was really like just a whirlwind of press. You know, you kind of have to spend 2 days going up and down the main street doing photo calls for various publications and doing interviews.
Just over and over.
Yeah, pretty much like like a full like 6 to 8 hour day doing that. So it's pretty exhausting, but yeah, so fun and just surreal because obviously it's the type of thing that you dream of for so long. So yeah, it was pretty great. It almost felt like a wedding, I have to say, because my parents were there and there was like the anticipation of this big event and, you know, everyone's getting ready and you come together and you're taking photos and it's like all the little shit, like the logistics of how everyone's going to get to the venue. And yeah. So
was that your first
really
was that your first big film festival in the States or?
For me personally, like I've been to Cannes for a short that, you know, I produced, not directed. So that was a whole other thing. I think Sundance is actually a bit more intimate because it's such a small kind of town, and it's more of a like winter vibe and it's cozy. Whereas Cannes is like paparazzi everywhere and it's more about the glamour.
In the middle of the European summer, right?
Right. And yeah, it's overwhelming in its own way. So yeah, Sundance was actually quite, you know, hectic, but had a nice kind of community vibe to it as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Natalie, I want to talk about a movie that we've mentioned on our podcast, that we watched this podcast a few times now. And I imagine this has shown up in some other interviews. And that was Upgrade. So I recently saw this for the first time, only in the last few months, and I loved it. What can you tell about our listeners about working with Leigh Whannell on that picture and your experience as an attachment and how that kind of prepared you for your own feature debut?
Yeah, that was so great. So I took part in this program with Film Vic, and they essentially, you undertake something called a director's attachment, where you shadow a director for 3 solid months. So it was pretty amazing. You're kind of privy to every facet of production. It's like you know, during the shoot as well. I drove him to set every day. And in post-production, I did a few weeks too. So yeah, no, it was cool. I mean, I think it kind of worked out because it was the perfect time that we had one-on-one. Because obviously on set, there's so much going on that it's like, I feel like it's too much to ask for a director to stop to explain something to you or whatever. So it was really great in that way that, you know, I could drive him and he was really open with me. He just kind of like vent, you know, what he was worried about or whatever was coming up that day. So I think a lot of what I learned was very much, not necessarily like hard skills of, you know, craft, but more just what to expect when you undertake, you know, such a huge kind of project, the pressures that are on a director and the expectations as well. And it was really great because I was able to, you know, Upgrade is such a great genre film and there's a lot of elements of prosthetics and visual effects and set design, for example, like awesome sets. So I was able to see, like, I guess, observe every aspect of that. And a few of the crew on Upgrade I actually ended up using on Relic. So it was nice to continue, those relationships. Yeah.
Speaking of Leigh, he actually sent a tweet out recently giving you praise for this film. Was this...
Oh, really?
Yeah. He said, check it out.
Sorry to steal your thunder there, Leigh, but I guess we're going to be the first to break it.
It's been getting Relic's been getting such rave reviews from what I've seen. I think it's sitting on 100% at the moment on Rotten Tomatoes. How's that been? Are you a person that checks every day, or you sort of back off and go, "It is what it is"? How do you balance that? Because I couldn't help myself. I'd be
Yeah.
Refresh.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, seriously. Well, when I was at Sundance, they, your press team always asks whether you want to be on the emails of all the reviews coming out. And for me, my first reaction to that was just straight up, no fucking way. Like, I will get way too in my head about it all. I just want to enjoy, Sundance as an experience and not think about it.
Yeah.
As the days kind of progressed, I just ended up reading them anyway, because who can resist? But also they seemed to be relatively positive. So I was like, okay, I can handle this. But then I feel like, I think we've gotten really lucky so far, and we've become, we've been really unscathed in that regard, because the group have been positive. But I'm sure there's some, I'm kind of mentally preparing myself for the fallout once it's like got a wider release, because there's no, inevitably it's going to be divisive, and people, you can't appeal to everyone. So.
Especially with the ending. Can you give us some insight on this ending? I thought it was extremely powerful. And I was a bit taken back by it. How did that sort of come about for the movie?
Yeah, it's such a interesting point, because when we were, looking for partners, people would often push back and be like, how is this going to be emotional? It just sounds really grotesque. But for me, I feel like it almost plays out like a funeral rite. So, for example, in Japan, you wash the body of your loved one before their funeral. So it wasn't too dissimilar from that. And certainly in the performance, that's how we tried to play it, so that you feel the grief and the acceptance, but also the connection in the midst of that as well. So I hope it works for people. I don't know, it could go either way, I feel.
Natalie, we wanted to ask you, as now someone who's had their first feature film released publicly, and you've got some experience with music videos and plenty of commercial work over the last few years, what advice would you have for other young aspiring filmmakers out there?
Yeah, good question. I feel like the most important thing is to keep making stuff, and it really doesn't matter what kind of scale that's on. I feel like the best piece of advice I ever got was to essentially make sure you're climbing the right ladder. So, when I was at film school, I think I tried to sell myself short by I thought I would pursue a career as a first AD, just because that's what I was good at. And I was like, well, I'm trying to be realistic here. And my lecturer at BCA was like, no, I thought you wanted to be a director. And I was like, well, I do. And so she was like, well, then you should direct. And so instead of pursuing, first ADing for long form, I just made sure I was doing, I did all sorts of jobs like production assisting, whatever it was, for years, but mostly in commercials, because the short form nature of it meant that I could fit in my own projects. So I think that's the most important thing, to not lose sight of why you're in the film industry in the first place, which is, to make films, and just to keep making them, even if they're tiny, even if they're whatever, $500 short films, as long as you're making stuff, you're improving. And also that's the thing with directing, no one's going to give you a job unless you have something to show for it or prove that you can do it. So unfortunately, you have to believe in yourself so much until other people believe in you.
That's a great bit of life advice. Thank you.
No problems.
Awesome. Did you feel the pressure of that being your directorial debut? How is that coming onto set the first day?
Yeah, I mean, I joked with my partner, who is on set every day as well, he's a filmmaker too, that it felt like I'd always, on the drive home, I'd always be like, I've fooled everyone. So there's always that like imposter syndrome thing, which a lot of people experience. So yeah, it doesn't go away, but to a certain degree, once you're in the rhythm of it, you have to put all those pressures aside, because it's too much of an obstacle, or it's too destructive, and it's not helpful. Like you kind of have to just go, okay, these feelings exist, but I'll just put them aside while I do my job. So
Natalie, this was shot in Melbourne, is that correct?
It is, yeah.
Awesome. What was it like shooting here in Melbourne? Maybe for some of our listeners overseas, and even some in Australia and some of the other sunny states. Can you talk us through a bit of what that was like, shooting particularly here on location and some of these exteriors in the forest?
We shot in late 2018 at a time when there was a massive Chinese blockbuster called The Whistleblower shooting as well. So our booking of the Dockland Studios clashed with theirs, and because we had to shift dates, it just meant that we lost our booking essentially.
Oh, wow.
And so we had to shoot in this tin shed of a warehouse out in Sunshine, because we needed a certain size studio. And it was the biggest pain in the ass, just because it was not soundproofed. And so you'd be shooting, and then it'd start pouring down with rain, and you'd have to hold for rain, which is the most terrible feeling when your actors are, acting their butts off, and then you've got to go again just for that. So that was frustrating for everyone. You also had lots of warehouses in the area. So constantly trucks coming in and tradies kind of unloading and that kind of thing. But yeah, it was great shooting in Melbourne. I mean, it was awesome, particularly because it meant that we could really use crews that, my producers and I had known for years. I think that's the most special kind of thing about it, because filmmaking is so much about relationships. And so to already have those relationships and be able to use people who are, because you kind of do become like a family. So I loved it. Yeah, it was great. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any upcoming projects that you're working on while in quarantine, or anything coming up?
Yeah, I'm writing a few things. The one that's furthest along is a Japanese folk horror.
Oh,
so
that sounds good.
I'm a huge folk horror fan. So I've been trying to make the most of being in ISO by just trying to write. And I've joined a writing group, which has been a bit of a game changer for me. It's been awesome. Yeah, we just sit on Zoom and write, just mute, and then you have 15-minute breaks, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's strangely effective. Yeah, I would recommend if you guys are writers.
Yeah, definitely.
We will have to check it out. Dan was a big fan of Midsommar that came out, so he'll be he's keen to find out about your picture. Nice.
Yeah, I only saw Midsommar recently because I was trying to save myself. I was like, okay, I can't let this affect what I'm writing. So yeah, luckily it wasn't too similar. So
very lucky.
Before we let you go, Nat, do you want to give, we have sort of a segment on the show where we give our listeners recommendations on what we watched this week. Is there anything you can recommend that you've watched in the past few weeks?
I just finished Dark. Does that count?
Yeah.
I don't know if TV counts, but
sure.
It's such a good series.
Season 3, is it?
Season 3, yeah. I do feel like season 1 was kind of just the most amazing, and then because they've had to extend it a little, it gets a little bit repetitive. I mean, that's the point, I suppose, but still it's just so stunning. And man, those actors have to cry I feel like I have to cry twice an ep, right? I was because I kind of binged it and I was like, fuck, there is no relief. There's no levity at all. Even just one character who was the comic relief would have been great. Yeah. Anyway, great show.
Oh, well, thanks so much for joining us, Nat. Hopefully we can have you for that Japanese folk horror when that releases soon.
Oh, absolutely. That'd be fun. Thank you, guys. This is fun.